Hello, scholars. This is Mr. Myers doing Lesson 4.1 on citizenship. As always, please take good structured notes over the objectives. Today we'll be talking about the concepts of citizenship and naturalization, the rights and duties of citizenship, and then some things that we would want all American citizens to know. It is important for you to note that there are 3 tests that the state of Missouri requires all students to pass: the U.S. Constitution test, the Missouri Constitution test, and the citizenship test. This lesson is specifically designed to help kids do well on the citizenship portion of your Week 4 timed assessment. That was a mouthful. All right, let's start. So let's start by defining citizenship. A citizen is a member of a society who possesses all the rights enjoyed by any other person in that society, but is also subject to certain duties. Citizenship then is kind of like a two-way street. There are some things that you have rights to do, but you also have some things that you are obligated to do. Now, if you look to the right, you'll see an excerpt from the 14th Amendment. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are sometimes called the Civil War Amendments. They were passed at the end of the Civil War, and they ended slavery, granted citizenship to former slaves, and kind of further defined that process, and then granted the 15th Amendment, male African Americans the right to vote. So let's read this excerpt. It says, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the U.S. and of the state wherein they reside." So it's important that you know that we had to kind of clarify the citizenship process because of former slaves and their status being somewhat kind of up in the air. So we had to kind of codify what is a citizen to make sure that all African Americans enjoyed those basic rights. So I think we understand all persons born in the U.S. It also says or naturalized. So naturalization refers to an act of adopting an alien or a non-citizen into the state and granting that person all the rights and the duties possessed by the other citizens. In short, it's basically a non-citizen becoming a citizen. So what are the rights of citizens? Let's start by defining rights. Rights are the legal power to act or the legal power to use one's property as he or she deems fit. It includes, but is not limited to, the idea of civil liberties. So civil liberties would be examples of rights that we have, but there are other rights as well. And there's different ways that we can kind of classify those rights. One would be thinking about natural rights. These are the Lockean, kind of natural rights that Thomas Jefferson articulated in the Declaration of Independence. These would be things like life, liberty, and property. Some people would argue privacy rights are also kind of natural protected rights. And these would include things like freedom of expression, freedom of belief, some of those kind of traditional things that we find in the First Amendment, for sure. You can also think about these rights in terms of political rights, and they would be things like voting, holding office. Marriage would be a political right, ensuring that everyone has fair trials by serving on juries. That is a political right that we have. Equal protection of the law. And these things are political in that they derive from the government's existence, not necessarily because they're inherently political in terms of what we think of, in terms of Democrats and Republicans arguing about policy. So the flip side of that coin would be the obligations of citizens, the duties of citizens. The term duty refers to an obligation to do something, some kind of debt that must be paid or obligation. So it's related to this concept of debt. In fact, if you think about the word duty, it's sometimes used to refer to money that is owed when you buy imports or exports. The concept of duty can be both legal and moral. There are legal duties of citizens. We would want you to make sure to have all these in your notes: obeying laws, somewhat argue voting would be a duty, paying taxes, serving on the jury when you're called, military service when you have to register for the draft, and things along those lines. There's also a concept of moral duties, and some people would argue, not all, that citizens have a moral duty to, for example, practice civil disobedience when faced with unjust laws, right? So Henry David Thoreau here on the right was very angry about the Mexican War and didn't want to pay taxes because he felt like his tax money was being used to expand slavery into those newly won territories. And so he basically said that citizens have a moral duty to basically not follow that law, in this case, not pay taxes to a government that was doing something unjust. So you might want to consider, do you actually have moral duties as well as legal duties? Now, these last couple slides are things that I felt that most Americans would know or want non-citizens to know who are maybe getting ready to become citizens. So a couple things here. Most Americans would probably consider the birthday of our country July 4th, 1776. when the Declaration of Independence was signed. So it might be important to know Independence Day, July 4th, 1776. The first three words of the Constitution, the preamble, are "We the People." That's important because, and if you remember from our lesson on this concept of legitimacy, of sovereignty, comes from the fact that the people are in charge. And so the fact that "we the people" are the first three words in the Constitution is really important. It suggests that the people are in charge, and the Constitution is there to serve the people as opposed to the other way around. Another thing that we would want you to know, our national anthem was derived from a poem written by Francis Scott Key during the War of 1812. He was being held as a prisoner on a ship and looked out and saw over Fort McHenry that the American flag was still flying after a particularly tough battle, and then wrote this impassioned poem, which would later serve as our national anthem. So all of you know that Missouri law dictates that we have to say the Pledge of Allegiance in school every day. Students are not required to do that, but it's something that you should be familiar with. In addition, the words "under God" were added to the Pledge of Allegiance during the Cold War when we wanted to differentiate ourselves from the communists, who were notoriously anti-Christian, anti-religion. So there's a little bit of kind of Cold War history there that you need to know about the pledge. Make sure you definitely know that it's Missouri law that we say the pledge. Throughout most of U.S. history, oppressed and disenfranchised groups were denied the full benefits of U.S. citizenship and fought hard for equality, and some of those battles are still fighting to this day. So I think it's important that we know that back in the day, white men were the ones that enjoyed the benefits of citizenship, and through hard-won rights, through lots of activism and lobbying and marching and protesting, civil disobedience, working within the system, outside the system, those disenfranchised groups fought for and won those rights, but it's a struggle that continues to this day. A couple other things to think about. Americans definitely like to think that we are an exceptional people in an exceptional nation, that there's something fundamentally different about America as opposed to every other country in the world. And I do think that one of the things that might separate America from the rest of the world is this deep-rooted belief, especially among those that want to come to the United States, in this concept of the American dream. And I think that you can make the argument that the American dream isn't real, that social mobility and other factors make it too difficult to be able to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and become whatever you want to be as long as you work hard enough, right? There would be some people that would argue that, but America is still a destination. Millions of people want to come to the United States. There's a reason why that's the case. And America, despite nativism and despite, calls for building a border wall, historically been very tolerant towards immigrants and is a nation of immigrants, and has historically welcomed and assimilated immigrants to a pretty high degree, arguably way more so than in other nations, which allows them to kind of become American. In some ways, America doesn't have national language or national religion or other things that unite us together. It's a creed. It's a belief in basic principles and liberties. And that is a pretty cool thing. So yay, America, land of the free, home of the brave. Make sure that you have taken good notes on what it means to be a citizen.